Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It is time once again for my weekly chatty catch up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading for roughly the present week, and some general lifey chit chat and catch up on my week. So I had a good reading week. It was a little all over the place. So let's start with the thing I picked up wildly on a whim, and that is Black Sheep by Georgette. I picked this up for Febregency, a Regency era readathon in the month of February. And this was a delight, really. I had kind of gotten it in my head. I wanted to read some more Georgette earlier in this year, and Febregency really inspired me to go look for her Regency books. And so I threw in a hold for this and it transferred over and I picked it up almost immediately. And it was just such a fun time. This is not a long one. I was expecting it to be quite long, but it was short. And it's very light on plot. The real entirety of the plot is just that we have sort of two couples. The younger couple, Stacy Cleverly, a young man who's kind of a rake, and Fanny, I don't remember if her last name is Wendover or not, but regardless, Fanny is the young woman, and Fanny is just very swept up and in love, but Stacy Cleverly is this rake who has kind of chased a lot of women and also sort of financially ruined himself, and Fanny may be a path toward money for him. But more importantly, the characters that we are actually focused on are the aunt and uncle of the two, separate individuals. So Miles Cleverly is the uncle of Stacy Cleverly and is a much older, I don't know how old exactly he was, but he seemed to be late 30s or potentially just over 40 probably. And Abby Wendover is the young aunt of Fanny. And they're very close, seemingly. All of them are in the area of Bath in the UK. And this is surrounding the Bath society and community there. So it has a very Bridgerton-esque vibe, I would say, really strongly for me. So it's very much about that small drama of Abby and Miles seeing what's going on with their young niece and nephew and trying to manipulate it without running them off, causing them to elope, basically, because they push back on the rejections and control of the aunt and uncle. Seeing their parents not really know what's going on. It's just so much fun and foibles, I would say. And then, of course, in the process of meddling in the two younger, we have Miles and Abby falling in love, even though they're so abrasive to one another. So it's just very charming and very delightful, very low on plot, and just about the characters. I do think this was not quite as strong as Frederica, the previous one by this author that I had read. It's a lot shorter than Frederica. Frederica was more than double this, I think. And it's much less sort of colorful and flamboyant about all of the plot elements and the characterization. So this felt much more mundane. And I kind of like that. That was sort of the moment for me. Appropriate, but it also means it's not going to stick with me as much. But I had such a great time reading this, and it was exactly the thing I was looking for. The next one I'm going to struggle to explain is Enshittification by Cory Doctorow. But you should pick this up because he explains everything really, really well. So this is about how technology and politics and everything in our world, thanks prominently to corporations and power, are getting worse. And that's kind of what it says. It says why everything suddenly got worse and what to do about it. So it looks at things like, say, in the social media space, the way that Facebook or Instagram initially start out really valuable to their customers. And then they slowly turn into something where they're walling you off and entrapping you. They're using you or your data to profit. And it's just an ever increasing cycle of making things worse for the user to increase the profit. Or not even just the user, for the users, the other businesses that major corporation works with, etc. So that's just one very, very small aspect of this. It goes on through many topics, the ways that monopolies and antitrust laws have degraded. And I will say this is very American-centric, though Doctorow is Canadian, and he has been involved with world political advocacy on this topic. And what I love the most about this really is that he does talk about solutions at the end. I am a massive sucker for anything that actually addresses a problem and then talks about solutions. And I think that was a strength here, massively, because he is really breaking down in an understandable way the progression of how we got here, the different factors of many, like dozens of different areas that are all experiencing this slow degradation and why, and then also talking about things like policy, things that we as consumers can do to take action, not in big ways necessarily, but in small ways, and the potential solutions long term. And I think that is just a great encapsulation of this. So this was fantastic. But I already knew I love Cory Doctorow as a writer. I already knew I did listen to the audio as well. I loved his voice narrating it and his voice as an author. And I just love the way he thinks about technology and the ways we should be able to share technology and not have it weaponized against us. I would say he mentions at the end, actually, that this was adapted from essays, and I had that suspicion early on because we get sort of significant chunks of this where he'll be explaining an element of something in one way, in one chapter, to do with one topic, and then he will use that same exact description on a different topic when he's trying to explain the same element. And it's not verbatim, but he's explaining the same thing in the same way, in almost the same verbiage. And so it feels a little repetitive, like whole huge chunks that feel repetitive. So this, I wish, had been laid out as the original essays rather than adapted. Or if it was adapted, it needed more editing to streamline that. So that was kind of the one wobble for me, is that there were some real repetitive chunks. But ultimately, I loved all the information and felt like it was presented so well, so coherently for a really complex technical situation. And I think most people would find this very accessible. So I just love this and I'm so glad. I waited in a hold line for months to get this. So I'm really glad I finally got to it. Then we have Near 1,000 Tables by Felipe Fernández-Armesto, A History of Food. And this was not at all what I expected, but it was also great. So this is a nonfiction history of food, as it says. And so I had expected this is going to be kind of food writing, right? Or a mix of history and food writing. And I feel this was much less food writing. So what I think the really big strength of this is that he broke this down not sort of chronologically or by specific foods. He focused on a series of what he sees as food revolutions. Not in the like people in the streets type of revolution, but like industrial revolution. Things that were major technological changes or driving forces in the food space. So the revolutions he takes us through here are the invention of cooking, the transition from preparations of raw food or ferments, things like that, to actually cooking over fire and heat being a major step in humankind. The next grouping is when food took on meaning beyond just eating. It wasn't just simply for survival, it was for sacred or taboo practices. And also, interestingly, he pairs with that when we started to discover that food had nutrients. And there's a deep dive into scurvy there and the sort of investigation in how to treat it. Next are two, actually. Breeding for herding and also cultivation of agriculture. So moving from just gathering what we could find and hunting to cultivation. Then the division of class for food. When we move from just simply home cooking or always cooking basic preparations of what's required to having these more class-based things like feasting, where you have a massive amount of food and just having that access to do so was a status symbol. The idea of different preparations, like having a chef who can cook in fancy ways or access to exotic ingredients being a sign of status and class. Then he moves into trade and the idea of having exotic ingredients being treated as something that's important and moves forward food as a revolution. And then one of the more modern things, the ability to grow things outside of their original climate. And finally, we dive into industrialization of food and things like agribusiness and industrial farming. So that goes further back than I even realized, but has been with us mainly in modern history. And he tackles each one of these topics in such an interesting way. Like these are very condensed chapters, so that none of them feel very long, though this did end up being a lot longer than I expected because the text is fairly small and packed on the pages. However, it's a relatively short book for how much detail and information is really crammed in here. And I think I love the way he ended the book with effectively telling us that he expects, his prediction is that the next food revolution will have to be something that is targeting undoing the effects of the last revolution, that industrialization and the negative problems that we're dealing with in the world as a result of it. And he sees that as the next big step in humankind's status of food. So I thought that that was such an interesting way to approach this topic, by centering the information around those revolutions. I think that just made it so digestible appropriately in a way that I wasn't expecting from this book at all. So that was really, really fantastic. As I said at the beginning, I kind of did expect a little more food writing to this, and that was not really present. And in fact, I think he kind of went in diving into sort of gruesome things really early on. So it was not very delectable to read at the beginning, because initially when you're talking about cooking over fire, there's a lot of things that are bloody and gross about that. And so you're initially getting all of this bloody, gross imagery. And then you jump into the sacred and finding out there's more to food, or treating food as more than just food. And we start hearing about things like cannibalism and also the treatment of scurvy. Very gruesome descriptions of the disease and the struggles through that are present. And so I think there was a lot of really gross stuff in here that was really interesting, but it was not like the delectable feast that I was kind of expecting. I think this was so compelling though. I really, really enjoyed reading this and got so much information out of it. I really tabbed it up a lot. I doubt you can see because I have tabs that are almost the color of the pages, but I really tabbed this up. It was full of lots of information and lots of references that I wanted to take away. So this was just super, super interesting. And I love the way the information was presented. So those are the books I finished. But I also, and I don't usually talk about this, I get a subscription to the Times Literary Supplement. And you can see we've got snails on the cover, and that's for, maybe it'll come through, A Snail Tale, an unpublished story by Sylvia Townsend. And it's not actually a snail tale, in fact. It is a story that involves a fairy that likes to eat snails. That is Sir Verdigris right there, and you can see he's cooking snails. So this was an unpublished story by Sylvia Townsend that they have published here, called The Pursuit and the End. I think late in her life, very late in her life, she wrote these little short stories about this sort of fae realm that were wondrous, and this is one that never made it into publication. And so they published it, and there's also an article about her life, and it's literary criticism on this story and her works. And I just found it so fantastic. It's not anything standout. It's kind of silly and wondrous and darkly humorous. And it's a light sort of old school fairy tale. And so I really enjoyed that story. I, however, also in this issue, got wonderfully a spread. You won't be able to see that, I'm sure, but this is 4 sci-fi novels. Usually this is a very literary type of magazine, but it covered 4 sci-fi novels, 3 in translation and 1 the new Ken Liu book. And one of the ones in translation, interestingly, was Cixin Liu's new book, which feels so timely because I just finished Death's End and watched the 3-Body Problem series 1, and so I was just feeling Cixin Liu and happened to get a little bit of him in this magazine. So I'm continuing to catch up on this because I got way behind on my issues of this last year, and it takes me about a full day's reading to get through one of these because it is so dense. There's a lot of great information, but I always love reading them. So I'm trying to get caught up. This was from back in December. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about that one. And then the stuff I'm actively reading right now, I have A Wrinkle in Time. I love this edition, but I don't think you're going to be able to see it through the library plastic. It's a very cool, very cool art. Wrinkle in Time. I am working on Accidental Presidents by Jerry Cohen. And actually, I should say, I loved the beginning of this. So this is about vice presidents that stepped into the role of president when their president died. And the first of those was John Tyler, which I knew nothing about him. So it is so interesting and so weirdly familiar to read because John Tyler basically was, as the first person to step in, to this situation, in 1840, the president died right after being elected and taking on his role. And so they have this whole term basically for John Tyler to fill. And they don't even know at this point whether or not to call him president, or he just is supposed to do the duties of president but maintain the title of vice president. And he himself decides to label himself the president. And that really pisses people off because they haven't decided yet in Congress what to do about that. And he just labels himself that. So that's the first thing that really pisses everybody off. But then he is wildly unpopular. He keeps doing things against the will of the people. He is vetoing congressional acts that are very popular, really major platform roles, including those of his own party. So he literally gets to the point where his whole party disavows him publicly. They start to proceed with impeachment investigations, but decide not to impeach him because they think it will not actually pass. And it's the first time they've even considered doing that. And he surrounds himself with loyalists as a result of this because he has pissed off everyone, including within his own party. And then a powerful man sort of comes against him from within his own party. And he decides, Tyler does, to sort of find a deflecting major thing to throw out as a deflection from this and get everybody focused on that for his next term so that he can get reelected. And that is the annexation of Texas. And so he decides to do this really big thing. And guess what happens? His opponents, his opposition party, and part of his own party band together behind that deflection, but not with him. They do not rally around him in that. So he does not actually win the re-election. So this is all history that is new to me. I have a very bad history background. So that was really fascinating to read because so much of that feels very familiar and really interesting to see the trajectory that went down. Anyway, I am barely into this, so that was just the first chapter. This is all I've read. Anyway, the other thing that I'm reading on audio is A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Finally, everyone has been telling me forever to read more Becky Chambers, and specifically the series, and so I'm finally getting to it. So I think that's it for book stuff. In watching things, I finished up The Boyfriend, season 2, a Japanese gay dating show. I think season 2 was much better than season 1, though I did really enjoy season 1. Season 1 was a lot slower and had a lot less actual romance. Season 2 was much more balanced between them supporting each other as fellow gay people who haven't had a lot of support in that space, and having conversations about things like coming out, stuff like that, and just building friendships with several relationships do actually begin and grow over the course of this. So I think it had a better balance of actual romance than the first season. So I really enjoyed it. And then I actually went to the movie theater for Valentine's Day and saw No Other Choice, Chan-wook Park's new film. And I think it's probably out of most theaters now. In fact, I caught it right on the tail end. But this was so interesting. It is adapted from, I think, a US-based novel by Donald Westlake called The Axe. And that's really interesting because I don't think Chan-wook Park speaks English, but I think it must have been translated over there. It's a thriller, I would say. I think from a social commentary perspective, it's very, very similar to Bong Joon-ho's Parasite, but that verges into psychological horror more than this does and is much more graphic. This one has some graphic violence, but I think for the most part it stays about at the level you would get from like an R-rated action movie. And that's about where it is. So this is a thriller based on a man who has worked his whole life in a paper company. And he gets laid off, he gets fired, and doesn't know what to do with himself. He's sure he's gonna get a job any day now. No problem. He's had such success. He has always worked hard. It's not gonna be an issue. And so his family kind of goes on living as they normally would because they have nothing to worry about. And then the bills start piling up and he's not getting a job. And so this has very like late stage capitalism vibes and really a lot of anti-corp sort of thing. But he finally realizes what he needs to do. And in fact realizes that he's in competition for the few jobs at his level. So he needs to actually go kill the competitors for this position that he could potentially get. And so this is him as an average guy, like taking drastic measures out of desperation because of capitalism. It was so good. I thought it was really fantastic. I do like Parasite more for some of those commentary aspects and the delivery, but this was also really, really, really well executed. And just watching him and his family as he's trying to keep all of this that's going on from his family and continue being himself while he's like slowly internally breaking down over all of this, and just so motivated to do everything for them and do what he thinks he needs to succeed in this system that he exists within. It's really, really hard hitting. So great film. Glad I went to see it. Other than that, I think that's all for watching stuff. So my life has been not very exciting this week. It's been pretty chill. We're extra quiet today because Lily, my foster cat, went back to the shelter yesterday. So today's going to be a big cleaning day after this, after I get this edited and up. So that's exciting, though she was going back just to be available to be seen by adopters because she was not getting much attention online. So hopefully someone will see her and love her, because she was both sweet and spicy, but she was mostly sweet. Yesterday we spent all day with her just on my lap, so that she got extra loves before she went back. We also had a loss in the family of my tablet. It decided to brick itself. And so I'm now in this weird limbo of trying to decide, do I replace my tablet or not? Because I did just buy a laptop last year. And this tablet, I was checking to see how long it had lasted. I've had it for 5 years and it's something I use every single day. So I know it would be worth it to me to buy a new tablet and would be not a significant expense. But I'm trying to see, can I live and incorporate my laptop rather than getting a tablet? Additionally, I think I'm going to end up getting the tablet, really, but I'm trying it. I'm giving it a week or so to see, and so far it feels much more clunky to have to haul my laptop all over the place. So we will see. I will probably have a tablet by the next time. But it was very sad because I have used that so much and just constantly rely on it, and to not have it is very annoying. What else? I think that's pretty much it. It's been a kind of an odd, disjointed week for sure. I felt like I was really turning a corner with some chronic illness things where like the medication I've been on for a little over a year was supposed to have some effects, and it feels like those are really finally kicking in. But then I also was having some other weird random stuff that seems to be chronic illness related that's just like, ugh, yeah, so frustrating. It's always whack-a-mole, isn't it? So it was a low-key week because of that, because I'm just feeling a little physically off, and especially today. But energy-wise, I'm okay. Anyway, so I think that's all for this week. I think we have completed and gotten through it. I have no recommendations for you this week, in fact. I have not been watching as much BookTube as a result of not having my tablet around to just carry with me and watch things when I have a few minutes. So that's fine. I'm sure I will catch up with some more recommendations of videos that I've watched and liked next week. So with that, I will say I hope you have a wonderful week in reading and in life, and thank you so very much for watching.